Hollow Ridge, New Mexico. Winter of 1890-4. The wind came down hard from the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, dry and sharp, scouring the face of the land like a blade. It howled through the dead cottonwoods and whipped the frost-bitten fields into a blur of brown and white. The sky hung low, thick with ice-gray clouds, and the cold bit through wool and skin alike. Ruth Kincaid pulled her shawl tighter as she trudged along the frozen dirt road, her feet raw inside cracked leather boots. Behind her, the wagon sat still, its wheel sunken into a rut, the mule dead from exhaustion, stiff-legged in the traces. Her daughter, Clara, barely 7, clung to her side, her nose pink with cold. Baby Thomas whimpered in her arms, buried deep inside the last blanket they owned. She had no place to go and knew it. The homestead was gone, taken by drought and dead. John had been gone longer. Fever took him 2 winters ago, and with it, the last of the warmth in her world. Neighbors helped for a time, but winter pressed down hard on everybody. Folks turned inward when hunger crept in. Her hands trembled from the cold, but also from the weight of it, all the kind of weight that starts in the chest and never leaves. She'd walked for miles on faith and grit, her mind dull from hunger, her body running on fear. Every step felt like sinking further into earth that didn't want her. Up ahead was a shack she had seen once, years ago, when passing through on a summer day. Back then, the grass was tall, the air soft. Now, the landscape looked like a painting stripped of color. The shack sat crooked on its foundation, part of the roof caved in. It was shelter, not truly, but it was the only thing left standing. She pushed open the door with her shoulder. It groaned, but gave way. Inside, the air was thick with dust and rodent droppings, but it was dry. That was enough. She set the baby down in a corner and gathered old boards from the floor to feed a fire in the rusted stove. Her fingers no longer bent properly from the cold, but she struck a match. Once, twice, then flame. The fire caught, small and bitter smelling. Clara leaned close, holding her hands out, her lips blue. Ruth wrapped the baby tighter and crouched by the stove. She didn't cry. Not then. There were no tears left in her. Only silence and smoke and the sounds of her children breathing. Outside, the wind screamed like a mourning woman. Inside, Ruth stared at the weak flame and let her heart break without a sound. The shack held the smell of rotten dressed in years without voices. Dust clung to the broken window panes, filtering the light into pale ribbons. Ruth sat near the stove with Thomas on her lap. Clara curled at her feet like a sleeping pup. She watched the flame burn down to her engine, thought of the house they lost. Whitewashed walls. The ticking of the mantel clock John never managed to fix. The sound of his boots on the porch. She could still feel the indent his body left in their bed. How achy to wrap his arms around her waist before dawn and whisper things too soft for memory to hold. The days after he died had been clear and bright. That was the cruelest part. Sunlight flooding the windows while she carried him out in a homemade pine box. Folks from church brought biscuits and weak coffee, but their eyes already looked past her. They saw the future before she did. Widowed, 2 mouths to feed, land gone to dust, no man to lean on. Her brother in Kansas wrote once, months back, saying she should come out. He meant well, but he had 7 children and a sick wife. She wouldn't burden him. Ruth had always known the West gave nothing it didn't take twice over. You survived by your own hands or you didn't survive at all. She stood slowly, her joints stiff, and checked the baby's cheek with the back of her fingers. Still warm. His breath fogged faintly in the cold air. Clara shifted but didn't wake. Her hair had grown too long. Ruth made a note to cut it when she had time. She walked outside, lifting her shawl against the wind. Snow had started to fall, soft, dry flakes that spun sideways in the air. The mule lay where it fell, eyes already gone dull. She could take the harness, maybe some of the hide, but her stomach turned at the thought. Behind her the hills rolled on in silence. The same hills John once rode over after hunting jackrabbit for supper. She remembered the way he would come back with blood on his hands and laughter in his eyes, claiming the land would feed them if they respected it. But the land had other ideas. She picked up a broken crate from behind the shack and brought it inside, breaking the wood for fuel. The sound startled Clara awake. "Where are we, Mama?" Ruth brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's eyes. "Just resting, baby. We'll figure it out come morning." And she would. She had to. Even if the past whispered that no one was coming. Even if the cold and silence were all that met her tomorrow. By morning, the wind had stilled. The world lay quiet under a thin coat of snow, brittle and white like old parchment. The kind of morning that looked clean but meant hardship. The kind that didn't wait for you to gather your strength. Ruth had no choice but to leave the children sleeping and head out to search for something wood, food, a sign of life. Her legs ached. Her stomach burned with emptiness. But the cold had eased, and that felt like permission. She followed a trail west, barely more than a game path lined with brittle mesquite and scrub cedar. The world had turned to hushed tones, the kind of silence that carried weight. She didn't know what she hoped to find, maybe just proof she was the last person alive. A mile in, she saw the smoke. Then, rising from the edge of a ridge, not much, not a chimney's worth, but enough to stop her in her tracks. Her first thought was fear. People in the wilderness weren't always kind. Some were desperate, some dangerous. But then she thought of Clara's blue lips, and the baby's weak cry, and kept walking. She reached the ridge and crouched low, peering over. What she saw was little more than a camp-off fire ring, tarp strung between cottonwoods, a bedroll on the ground. A man stood by the fire, stirring something in a dented tin paw. His coat was patched, boots worn, but he moved with calm purpose, like someone who'd been alone too long to expect company. Ruth cleared her throat. Not loud, just enough. He turned fast, rifle half-minus raised before he saw her. Then he lowered it slow, and studied her from under the brim of his hat. "I've got children," she said, voice rough with cold and pride. "Back in a shack down that trail. We need help." He didn't answer right away. Just looked at her with eyes the color of ash, unreadable and quiet. "I'm not asking for much," she said, jaw set. "Just a little heat. Maybe food if you've got more than you need." Still, he didn't speak. Then finally, "You got a name?" "Ruth Kincaid." He nodded once, almost like he recognized it. "And Micah." The silence stretched. "You aren't?" he asked, not unkindly. "No," she said. "Just tired." Micah looked at her for a long moment, then gestured toward the fire. "Go fetch your young ones. It'll stoke the flame." And just like that, the sky seemed a shade lighter. Ruth didn't trust him, not yet. But trust was something the frontier offered on a silver plate. It came from need. From grit. From watching how someone handled silence. As she turned to go, Micah spoke again. "I lost someone too," he said. "I still on the fire. A long time back." Ruth paused, said nothing, but a part of her settled like dust finding ground after a long time in the wind. Subscribe, and keep pace with the frontier. The children didn't stir much on the walk back. Clara walked close behind, silent but steady, while Ruth carried Thomas bundled tight in the last of the wool. The cold was biting, but less so than the night before. Hope, no matter how small, could warm you like that. Micah had set up a second pot by the time they returned. Porridge, thin but hot. H.E.D. built a windbreak from old fence planks. H.E.D. scavenged somewhere nearby, and he offered Ruth his blanket without speaking. She took it with a nod, laying it across the ground before sitting with Thomas in her lap. He poured them 10 cups of food without ceremony. Clara stared at him wide-eyed, curious, half-minus afraid, but when he handed her a spoon, she took it undate like a child afraid the meal might vanish. Ruth kept her eyes on the fire, on the steam rising from her cup. Micah didn't press her for details. He didn't ask about her dead husband or the mule or what exactly had driven her to walk barefoot through snow. He watched the children eat, then sat down on a log a little apart from them, nursing his own tin of food like H.E.D. learned not to expect conversation. The silence stretched, but it didn't feel empty, just unfinished. Later, when the children napped trapped in the spare tarp, Ruth asked, "You always alone out here?" Micah shrugged. "Some folks are better at it than others. You choose it." "Not at first. Then, maybe I did." She waited, expecting more. He didn't give it. Still, the next morning, he offered to help move the children and what little she had into his camp. The shack was drafty and colder. He said it made more sense. said it plain without pride. Just sense. Over the next few days, they shared the war. Ruth boiled creek water in the mornings, made a weak tea from pin and needles that helped the children stop coughing. Micah brought back rabbits and once half a bag of oats he'd traded for at a ranch to the south. He never told her exactly what he'd given in exchange. Ruth chopped wood, washed cloth, mended tears in Micah's shirts when he wasn't looking. The days passed slow but steady, the kind of rhythm that's often pain without erasing it. One afternoon while skinning a rabbit, Micah finally spoke about the past. She was from Missouri, my wife. Red hair like the flame of a match. Took sick one spring, and no doctor for miles. I buried her under a cottonwood. Ruth didn't reply, just kept sewing the button on his shirt. He didn't need comfort. He needed space to speak. They said a man should move on. I tried. But there's a difference between moving and living. Ruth nodded. That's the truth. He watched her for a long time. What about you? She gave a small, tired smile. I lost John. He had kind hands. Died before the rain stopped coming. Micah looked at the fire. Hard land for good people. That night, after the children were asleep, they sat by the fire in silence again. But it felt different now, less like two strangers enduring the same storm, more like two souls drawing warmth from the same flame. Neither said what was growing between them. There wasn't room yet for that. But in the way Ruth handed him the cup, in how he caught her child when he stumbled, there was something forming, unspoken but not unnoticed. The days turned longer, just barely. The sun held the sky a little later each evening, stretching its fingers over the land like it wasn't quite ready to give up. Snow melted in thin patches. Rabbits grew leaner. The work never lessened, but there was steadiness in it. Routine. By mid-February, Ruth had built up enough strength to haul water without tiring and began teaching Clara her letters again, using a stick-and-smooth patch of ground. Micah repaired the roof of the shack with whatever scrap wood he could scavenge, even hoisting new beams with his bare hands. They'd started talking more in the evenings. Not about feelings, never that, but about fences, chickens, seeds, the future without naming it. Then came the letter. It arrived by way of a traveling preacher, bundled in woolen, carrying a Bible under one arm and a pouch of mail under the other. He stopped at the camp, offering a blessing and a worn loaf of bread. Micah welcomed him, wary but polite. Ruth thanked him for the food. When he handed her the letter, her hands shook. The return address was her brother's Lawrence in Kansas. She hadn't expected a reply, not after so many unanswered letters. She read it by the fire that night, lips pressed tight. Lawrence wrote in short, practical sentences. Said they had room, said his wife was doing better, that their local school was needing a teacher, and maybe Ruth could fill that role. He promised help, a roof, a second chance. She folded the letter and stared at the flames. Micah said nothing, just watched her. You should go, he said finally. Ruth didn't answer. You and the children be safe. Fed. You'd a family again. The wind shifted outside. Cold crept under the tarp. I've got family here, she said after a long silence, her voice low. He flinched almost unnoticeably. You don't tell me anything, Ruth. No, she said. But maybe I want to stay anyway. Micah stood, stepping away from the fire. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Ruth stood too, angry now, though she wasn't sure what. You think safety is the only thing people need? I think you've got children to look after, and I've done that, through snow and death and empty fields. Micah's face hardened. You don't have to prove yourself to me. I'm not, she snapped. I'm proving something to myself. He didn't answer, just looked at her with that same quiet pain he wore when he thought no one was watching. That night she lay awake beside her children, watching the stars through a hole in the roof. Her fingers brushed the letter. Clara's small hand clutched the edge of her coat. She thought of Kansas, clean rooms, a school, a future with her name on it. She also thought of Micah, the way he sat down to cups of coffee each morning, even when she hadn't yet come outside. Come morning the fire had burned down low, and Ruth didn't know yet which way her feet would take her. The sky hung heavy that morning, thick with cloud and silence. Ruth rose before dawn, brushing snow from her coat as she stepped outside. The land looked washed out, waiting. Micah was already up, packing a small bag by the fire. She stood watching him for a moment, arms folded. "Where are you going?" "Riding north," he said, not looking at her. "There's a man up that way, Travis Hargill, rancher with a tight grip on folks who owe him. He's been spreading talk about a woman and children squatting near the edge of his land. Says it's his water we're stealing. Says he'll burn us out." Ruth felt her chest tighten. "What's he want? To scare you off? Or worse?" Micah looked at her now, his face calm in that quiet, dangerous way men sometimes get when they've decided something that can't be undone. "I aim to speak with him," he said. "Speak with him?" she asked, voice sharp. "Or get yourself killed?" He didn't answer, just tightened the strap on his satchel. She stepped closer. "You don't need to do this." "Yes, I do," he said. "Not just for you. For me. I've been quiet too long while men like him run roughshod over folks with less." "You think he'll listen?" "No," Micah said. "But it'll make him think twice." She wanted to stop him, wanted to reach out and hold his coat, tell him they could leave, go to Kansas, start again. But she knew the look in his eye. This wasn't just about her or the children. This was old anger, old shame. He mounted his horse in silence. The animal snorted and stamped in the cold. "Micah," she said, voice trembling, "if you go, come back. No matter what happens, come back." He gave a single nod. "I will." And then he rode out into the pale morning, his figure fading against the hills. Ruth spent the day in a restless fog, chopping wood until her hands ached, keeping the fire stoked and the children close. She heard nothing as the sun passed its peak, saw nothing. By nightfall she had nearly given up hope, but just before dark she saw him, limping over the ridge, hat low, blood on his shoulder. His horse trailed behind him, reins loose. She ran to him without thinking, catching him by the arm. "What happened?" He listened, Micah rasped, grimacing as she helped him sit. Or at least, his men did. "Turns out folks don't respect a man who threatens women and children when someone's willing to say it out loud." "You're bleeding," she said. "I've had worse." She brought him inside, cleaned the wound, bound it tight with her last clean cloth. His skin was warm, his jaw clenched in pain, but he didn't flinch. "You were right," he said finally, as she tied the knot. "About what?" "Safety, yes, not the only thing people need." She looked at him, then really looked and saw the man beneath the silence. The grief, the scars. They didn't speak again that night. They didn't need to. He was back, and she was leaving. Spring came late to Hollow Ridge, but when it did, it came with gentleness. The wind softened. The earth cracked open. Wildflowers pushed up through the thawed dirt like small, defiant promises. The shack, once barely fit to hold back the cold, stood sturdier now. The roof no longer leaked. A new door hung on proper hinges. Mike had cut and split enough firewood to last 2 winters. Ruth planted a garden just beyond the edge of the creek bed: beans, squash, corn, seeds borrowed from the preacher who passed through again, grinning at the sight of smoke rising from a chimney that used to sit cold. Claire laughed more now. She chased chickens Micah bartered for with the same determined expression her mother once wore crossing the bitter field. Thomas learned to walk wobbly at first, then stronger, and his first word was "Mama" or "Dada," but warm. Ruth cowed and decided whether to laugh or cry at that. Sometimes she caught Micah watching the children when he thought no one noticed. His face would go still, not sad exactly, but quiet with something close to yearning. One evening, as the sky turned violet and the fire burned low, Ruth sat beside him on the split log by the garden. "You think it'll take?" he asked, nodding at the seedlings poking through the soil. "If it doesn't," she said, "well, plant again." Micah turned something over in his hand. A small silver locket, dulled with time. H.E.D. never mentioned where it came from. Now he opened it and held it out. Inside was a lock of red hair and a name etched in small, patient script: Anna. "You'll always love her," he said, not looking at Ruth. "But I think there's still more life to live." Ruth took the locket, closed it gently, and handed it back. "Then live it," she said. A week later, he offered her a ring. It wasn't fancy, just a plain band made from iron, polished smooth. H.E.D. shaped it himself by firelight and filed the edges with care. She didn't answer right away. She looked down at her all-used hands, the dirt under her nails, the faint lines at the corner of her eyes. Then she took the ring and slid it on her finger. They married that spring under the cottonwood near the creek. No preacher, no choir, just the wind in the trees, Clara holding a fistful of flowers, and Thomas clapping at the way sunlight filtered through the branches. Ruth felt no need for vows beyond what they already knew, that they had come through the worst and chosen each other anyway. That sometimes love didn't come with fireworks. Sometimes it came with the steady lighting of a morning fire. Sometimes it looked like survival, reshaped into joy. Later, as she lay beside him, her hand resting on the small curve of her belly, she whispered this time, "We build something that lasts." Micah brushed her hair back, kissed her forehead, and said, "We already are." Outside, the stars stretched wide across the sky. The house was warm, the future uncertain but theirs. If you felt the weight of silence and still search for hope, subscribe and share this path.